we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African-American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing?
Please welcome U.S. Senator Chris Murphy.
Senator, thank you for being with us. I said at the beginning that you are fighting for your life to save lives, and we want to talk to you about that. You need no introduction, but let's just get right into it, and I'll just ask the question that you asked, hopefully not rhetorically, which is, what are we doing? Yeah. And maybe where are we? I know you've been working very hard these past more than 72 hours, but flat out.
So I've been in this fight for 10 years since a mass shooting occurred in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. I'm embarrassed that I didn't work on this issue prior to Sandy Hook, but that was my moment of conversion. And so I've been in the middle of this for a decade. I have never succeeded in trying to pass a big federal piece of anti-gun violence legislation. But I've never seen the fear out there that exists in the country right now. I mean, Uvalde and Buffalo, on the heels of the pandemic, have really shaken this country, parents and kids, in a way that I've never seen. And I think they are just as shaken by the idea that Congress may once again do nothing. And so to me, this is a test of our ability to make people more safe. But I think this is also, for a lot of citizens out there, a test of democracy if you can't do something now.
So very practically, where are you?
Where are we? We're close. We've been involved.
Close on what?
Well, I can't tell you that, but we are negotiating a package of changes in gun laws that would include red flag laws, it would include improvements in our background check system that would zero in on these 18 to 21-year-olds who seem to be doing a lot of the mass shootings, paired with a significant investment in mental health and school safety. This would be the biggest and most significant change in our gun laws in 30 years. It is not everything I want, but it would show that we have the ability to break the log jam. But this is hard stuff. There's a reason why we haven't done this in 3 decades, because it's so easy to retreat to your political corners, especially for Republicans. And we are close but not there yet on an agreement.
When you say close but not there, what's the outstanding issue? If you could bring us in the room, and who do you need to persuade?
I cannot bring you in the room, only because we are at maybe the most sensitive part of the negotiation right now. Senator Sinema, Senator Cornyn, Senator Tillis, and I just broke up a discussion in the Capitol. I think Senator McConnell has put Senator Cornyn in charge of these negotiations. And so I think first and foremost, we have to get Senator Cornyn comfortable. But we also have a bigger room, including a lot of Republicans that are more eager than I've ever seen before for this to get done.
Let me ask you a question. Howard Schultz was just here, as you heard him speak about various polls, what's going on in the country, and the idea that there is a large majority who want things like background checks and the like, who believe that there is a middle ground, or at least we say that. We say that. And yet, for reasons that I don't understand, we often blame the NRA and money and politics and this and that. I also wonder whether you think that there is some calculus, some politician who's on the other side of you, who at least thus far has been saying to themselves, I'm going to get voted out if this doesn't happen. So there are clearly Americans who either will vote them out or somebody has convinced them otherwise. How do you square the circle?
So we've always had, incredibly good public approval ratings for things like background checks, better public approval ratings today for assault weapons ban than ever before. But the question is, why has that not resulted in a change in the people that are elected to Congress? One, people have not always elevated it to their number 1 or 2 issue when they come out to the polls. And two, when you have so few swing districts in this country, in Republican districts, that NRA endorsement still matters a lot, because when you really look at the number of people that are voting, it's a sliver of the overall population in a Republican primary. And for that sliver of the population, the NRA endorsement matters. And the general election is unfortunately irrelevant in many of these districts. So that, I think, is part of the issue, is that the popularity of background checks is in the general electorate, but in the Republican primary electorate, the NRA and the gun lobby still has a lot of influence.
What do you think about the role of business in this conversation? There was a letter that was published this morning by several hundred business leaders, but I would say not the largest business leaders or the largest companies in America necessarily, who signed on to a letter saying, we need some form of gun safety. But it was not a specific letter, and it wasn't particularly outspoken, if you will. And I feel like, and when you talk to the CEOs who signed the letter, and by the way, the CEOs who didn't, there is a real anxiety about signing, about even acknowledging the issue publicly for fear, and we've been discussing it all day here, this idea that there are certain places in America where now politically there'll not just be consumer retribution, but political retribution.
Well, here, I think, is incredibly safe ground for business leaders, because, well, it is true that the 90% of Americans that support background checks don't necessarily translate into political change. It is still 90% of Americans that support background checks, is 90% of their customers. And so I just think, you are risking very little in being in alignment with 90% of the people that you serve. And so I'm glad for the engagement from business leaders, but you are right. They can do more. More can enter this fight. And what I know about the great social change movements in this country is that it often has been business leaders and corporations that have pushed the ball down the field.
But I'll give you an example. So in the state of Texas, you may know this already. In the state of Texas, for example, Citigroup and JP Morgan had to sign letters to sell municipal bonds in the state saying that they would not discriminate against gun manufacturers. This despite having some views about guns. And similarly, in the state of Louisiana, a bill was passed, again, relating to municipal bonds. So if you want to do business in some of these states, you almost have to keep your mouth closed if you have a view that's dispositive to that state.
Yeah, I think
position on these.
Yeah, I think these companies need to really have a serious discussion about whether it is so important to do business in these states that they want to fund an industry that is standing in the way of making this country more safe. Our kids are panicky right now. My fourth grader, had conversations at school the day after Uvalde that he shouldn't have to have. And the question is, do corporations want to be continuing to support an industry and a movement that is standing in the way of my fourth grader and their kids feeling more safe in schools?
Are you surprised that business hasn't done more? I've written about this issue at great length for many years, proposed many years ago that the banks actually could take an active role with credit cards, which they are one of the only sort of eyes actually on where these guns are purchased, how many are purchased, the body armor. You can see the trends typically way before these things happen. And 77% of mass shootings in America are bought with legal guns. By the way, oftentimes within 2 to 3 weeks prior. So there is a cause and effect that's very clear.
And I think it's important to note that it was private sector constraints that had kept AR-15s and body armor out of the market, For a long time, the gun industry knew how dangerous those weapons were, knew that selling tactical gear openly on the market was likely to fuel very dangerous behavior. And so there was a private sector decision made by the industry for a very long time to hold back the marketing of those products. As the nature of the gun market changed and less households were buying guns, they knew they needed to sort of ramp up the sales of these very expensive weapons to a small portion of the population. And so all of a sudden, we saw this mass marketing of assault weapons. But it's a reminder to the banks you're talking about that there is a history in the firearms business and the firearms world of private companies making decisions for the public good instead of their own private good.
Do you think there's a messaging problem that your peers in the Democratic Party have around this issue, which is to say that when you talk to oftentimes Republicans, but gun owners in America, and there are many of them, as you know, they think that the Democrats are coming for their guns. That's what they will tell you. And there are peers of yours who say that quite openly. And whether you think that that is actually an effective and helpful step in what you're trying to accomplish.
Again, I don't think that our problem here is one of messaging because, again, on all of these interventions we're talking about, whether it be background checks or bans on assault weapons or permitting of handguns, you have massive majorities of the American public who support them. I think you were talking about a very small minority of Americans who believe that I have some secret agenda. They are incredibly loud. And in the Republican primary and in the Republican electorate, they have a lot of power. But I'm not necessarily sure that I have control over that because what happens, as you know, is that one Democrat says something that makes a headline and it then becomes extrapolated to all of the rest of us. I don't know that that's a problem of Democratic Party messaging writ large.
One of the things we heard from Howard Schultz, which surprised me, was he talked about hardening stores.
Yeah.
In the same way that a lot of people talk about hardening schools. How do you think about that? What would happen to society? What would society look like if things were, quote unquote, hardened? And given that we've also seen places that were supposed to be hardened, it's unclear what hardened really means.
Yeah. I think about this a lot, right? Because I've got 2 kids in the public schools, and I have come to the conclusion that I don't want my kids to go to school in a prison. I think that would affect their ability to learn and be a child. I also don't think there's any way that we can harden our way out of this problem because there are simply too many people, too many places where lots of Americans congregate that you cannot adequately protect with fencing and walls and bulletproof glass. So a company like Starbucks could just decide to not allow guns in the store instead of simply requesting that their customers don't bring guns inside. We as a society could choose to not sell the most powerful weapons available in the world that allow little kids' bodies to be torn into shreds. We have better options than hardening every school, every shopping mall, every workplace in the country. That being said, I think there are some common sense steps you can take to make our schools safer.
Like what?
So I do think that it makes sense to make sure you have proper locking mechanisms, that you've got video surveillance systems outside those entrances. But do I want a camera at every corner of my kid's classroom tracking their every movement? I don't know that that's the environment that I want my kid to go to school in.
What about the issue of mental health? It's something you hear from the other side of your aisle about a lot. It clearly is an issue. Clearly, these gunmen have mental health issues. The question is, how do you think you can meaningfully confront that? Interestingly, by the way, I'll also mention, and I was also surprised that Howard Schultz said that the number one issue that he's confronting in his stores is the mental health, and this is a different issue, but just mental health more broadly of his employees.
So listen, we have a mental health crisis in this country. We have a lack of access to mental health resources, and we should fix it, period, stop. I don't think we should believe that by fixing a broken mental health system, it is going to cure our gun violence epidemic, because there's no evidence that this nation has more mental health issues than any other nation in the world. We have all the gun violence. And the reason is individuals in the United States, when they have a homicidal thought or a suicidal thought, can easily access a weapon, whereas those same individuals who are having the same thought in other nations can't easily access that weapon.
What do your peers on the other side of this issue say when you say that to them?
So the back end of that answer, though, would have been, but there is no doubt that it will have an impact, right? I think if you do better in mental health services in this country, you will have an impact on violence. There's no doubt about it. I just don't think that it's the primary cure for our epidemic of violence. And let me say this, the bill that we are negotiating right now is going to have a significant mental health investment in it. And that's going to be important, and that's going to save lives. There's no doubt about it. But for me, it is the changes in gun laws that I think will be much more impactful.
A lot of people worry about the next version of this, which is ghost guns. Mm-hmm. Does your bill take care of that?
So our
Does it
bill,
address it?
our bill will likely not address ghost guns, except that it may end up requiring more sales to go through the background check system, which, given the president's new executive order, could include ghost guns. But I just met with Mayor Adams yesterday in my office, and the one topic he wanted to raise with me was the issue of ghost guns. He has seen over the course of the last 3 years a 270% increase in the number of ghost guns that are being used in crimes, untraceable, right? Makes it almost impossible for law enforcement to figure out who did the crime. So this is an issue that mayors and police chiefs are panicking about. The president's executive order is going to be a big help.
We talked about it a bunch in conversations both with the Treasury Secretary and with Howard Schultz. Again, it goes out to the issue of speaking out, but I'm curious what you thought of what happened in the state of Florida with the Rays. I don't know if you followed this, but the Rays are a baseball team that were about to get a $35 million stadium that was being built in the state of Florida. And they tweeted out, and I can get you the tweet, they said, "We all deserve to be safe in schools, grocery stores, places of worship, our neighborhoods, houses in America. The most recent shooting in Buffalo and Uvalde has shaken us to the core. This cannot become normal. We cannot become numb. We cannot look the other way. We all know if nothing changes, nothing changes."
Seems pretty anodyne.
The Governor DeSantis, struck the amount of money that was being reserved for the stadium. And I just wonder how you think that plays out, not just in Florida, by the way, but in all sorts of states, and whether you think it's changed the dialogue that we're even having in this country.
Yeah, it is pretty stunning, the chilling of free speech that's going on in Florida today, that you have a governor who is essentially trying to dictate to his citizens what they can say and what they can't say, and doling out pretty significant consequences for speaking their mind. He's obviously engaged in a presidential primary campaign, and this may serve his own personal political ends, but I think you are right. The risk is that it is incredibly chilling across the country in what people choose to say.
What about the role of social media? And I'm not talking about broadcasting mass shootings and murder, which is an issue unto itself.
Right.
I'm talking about whether you think that social media, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Apples of the world, should be, and it becomes a civil liberty issue, should be surveilling effectively to prevent these things in advance. Invariably, as you know, in almost every investigation, when they go back a day later, you look and what are these people typing on Google, on Facebook, in their messages? What do you say?
We've had these discussions inside our group. I think it's very difficult because you are right. It would require a level of surveillance, and it would potentially involve a system of reporting of conduct that in and of itself is not criminal. And I worry a little bit about, unelected employees of these companies making decisions for themselves about what conduct is potentially dangerous and what conduct isn't. So I think it's worthy of a discussion, but I think there are potentially significant and major downsides with that kind of surveillance.
And then my final question is this: the role of SCOTUS, the role of the Supreme Court in various laws that, by the way, are being put in place in different parts of the country, various states. I'm thinking of New York, which has a law that puts limits on carrying handguns in place that could effectively be upended by a Supreme Court that is not aligned, I don't think, with your view on these issues. And what that means, not just for this year or next, but potentially for generations.
I wrote a book on the history of violence in America, and in it I came to the conclusion that the Second Amendment does protect an individual's right to own a firearm. A lot of progressives don't share that view. But I also came to the definitive conclusion that our founding fathers absolutely believed in the heavy regulation of firearms because at the time of the adoption of the Second Amendment, there was the heavy regulation of firearms. And so to me, it is a bastardization of the Second Amendment to suggest, as some conservative jurists do, that it is absolute and it prevents our ability as a legislative body to regulate that use. But I fear that that's the direction the court is heading in. And if you take a look in particular at some of Amy Coney Barrett's work on the appellate court, She suggests a extreme reading of the Second Amendment, and I worry that she may have 4 or 5 of her colleagues that are on the verge of taking away from us our ability to protect our constituents. It's something that we're all going to have to watch very, very carefully.
Senator Murphy, I want to thank you for being here, for coming amidst all of the busy work and important work that you're doing. We appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.